How many of you are writers here? And how many of you are budding writers here? And how many of you think there's something like the writer's block? There are so many definitions of this term, writer's block. Sometimes when you sit in front of the laptop, you suddenly find nothing there. Your ideas suddenly vanish into thin air. You can't write anything. You can't pen your thoughts. And these monsters of negativity they start flaunting their fangs and all, and they try to grip you. So many times my students have told me that, madam, we cannot write. This writer's block is always there. There are so many definitions of this term. They call it a literary inhibition, literary slowdown, but I call it a myth. A total unadulterated myth. And let me hark back to my childhood. I was in the 6th standard and I was obsessed with writing. I would just write. And I used to think that I was a great writer in the 6th standard. Then came this girl in the 6th standard, and she would come every day. She had a notebook in her hand. She would come and sit on the last bench of the classroom, and she would scribble something. I was sort of overawed by her because she had this superior aura about her. But one day, I mustered enough courage to ask her, "What are you writing?" With an arrogant toss of her head, she said, "I'm writing a limerick." I was totally flummoxed. I did not know what a limerick was. I was in the 6th standard. Anyway, I did not ask her. I went home and consulted the dictionary. But I couldn't get the word because I did not know the spelling. But then I mustered courage to ask my dad what a limerick is. And he told me that a limerick is a 5-line verse with the rhyme scheme of A, A, B, B, A. And then he recited a limerick which I can never forget. And with your permission, I would like to recite that. So many of you must be knowing it. There was a man from Nantucket who kept all his cash in a bucket. He had a daughter named Nan who ran away with a man. And as for the bucket, Nan took it. So I was so fascinated by this limerick, this genre of poetry, that surreptitiously and very furtively I started writing limericks. And still, there are about 200 limericks lying somewhere gathering dust. Those limericks I wrote in the school. Okay, so then I graduated to writing essays, and I'll tell you how that happened. In 10th standard, I was obsessed with Charles Dickens. And I remember having written an essay on Charles Dickens, which was applauded by the nuns in the convent, and they said it's a very good essay. But when I showed it to my dad, he just flung it away saying, "What a lousy essay. Your vocabulary is very poor. You can't write for nuts. Improve your style." So I went home, and in corners of the room, I would sit and write. And now I started improving on my essays. And from limericks, I graduated to essays. So many of them I wrote. And that was the end of my literary career in my childhood. I wrote limericks and essays. That was the full stop. But later on, in college, I was too busy getting educated. So writing took a back seat. And I did not write. But then, when I became a lecturer myself, at times I would get bored of the classes and all. So one day, I again took to writing, but I would write very furtively. I did not show what I wrote to anyone. But then something very interesting happened in one of my MPhil classes. I was teaching them Mahatma Gandhi, and I was referring to Martin Luther King Jr. And none of them had heard about Martin Luther King Jr., but they knew something about Gandhi, something. And one of the students, he had the audacity to tell me, "Madam, you always talk of Gandhi. We don't need a Gandhi. We need a Hitler. And I will read about Gandhi only when you pen something about Gandhi in poetry." So that was the trigger for me. And because I had been writing limericks in school, this struck me with full vigor now. And I started writing the poetic biography of Mahatma Gandhi in the limerick genre, AABBA. But I was so obsessed with it, so passionate about it, that I did not suffer any writer's block. Because in school, I was so passionate about writing limericks, I was so passionate, so obsessed with writing essays, that I never suffered from this mythical writer's block. So I started writing this Ballad of Bapu, and I did not know when it turned into 300 pages of verse. It became a book, and right now it's a bestseller. And I sent it to Tushar Gandhi, the great grandson of Mahatma Gandhi, and he was so fascinated by it that he asked me in an email, "Madam, can I write the blurb? Can I write the foreword in poetry?" So he has written the poetic foreword to this book. So that was recently, that was in 2014. So I never, what I'm trying to say is that in this literary career, or lack of it, whatever you call it, I never suffered from the writer's block, which I always insist is a myth. And many of my students in my classes, creative writing classes, tell me that sometimes, "Madam, we sit in front of the laptop and suddenly those grotesque faces appear there and they start making those funny faces and ugly faces and they try to browbeat you." So I keep telling them there's nothing like that. These are just the monsters of negativity. They'll try to browbeat you. They'll try to cow you down. But these are just monsters of negativity. You have to positivize yourself. So they also tell me that, "Ma'am, you always keep saying it's a myth." I say, of course, it's a myth. And the only antidote is that you should be obsessed with writing. Whatever you're doing, you should be obsessed. You should be very, very passionate about it. So let me cite one other instance. One of the students, he said, "Madam, I'm very, very passionate about writing and I want to see my book as a bestseller." He was just 18 or 19. And then I told him, "Write on this." I gave him a topic. But the very next day, he comes to the class and tells me, "Madam, I just cannot write. I have this writer's block." I said, "Are you with me on Facebook? Are you my Facebook friend?" He said, "Yes, very much, since long." So I told him, "I block you right here." And that is the writer's block. So later on, he cornered me, "Madam, you embarrassed me," and all that. So I said, "I don't believe in writer's block. There's no such thing as a writer's block. If you're a writer, you're a writer, you're a writer." The plumbers don't have a block. The engineers don't have a block. The doctors don't have a block. So why should the writers be so entitled? Why should they luxuriate in this writer's block? So whatever, but some people, there are many definitions, many perspectives on the writer's block. Some say that no, it's not mythical. There is an iota of truth in it. And this reminds me of what Maya Angelou used to say, that whenever I have these monsters of negativity trying to browbeat me, then I start writing anything that comes to my mind. I start writing doggerel, I start writing limericks. And for example, she cites an example. She says, "I write, the cat sat on the mat and not the rat." So this is something very absurd, a doggerel. And so she says, she writes somewhere that the muse of poetry is so embarrassed that it comes scurrying to her and it tells her, "Wait, wait, don't write such poetry, I'll come." So the muse comes back. So I believe that this block is only in the mind. It's only a myth. There's no such thing as a writer's block. And I know it because I have never suffered it. A writer should be obsessed with writing. A writer should be very, very passionate about writing. Let me cite another example. Uh, all this, Ballad of Bapu was a bestseller and people still read it. But then Facebook happened for me. I started writing something on Facebook. I did not know what it was. Earlier, I was obsessed with limericks. Then I became obsessed with essays. Then Facebook happened for me, and I started writing obsessively on Facebook. Anything. I used to write about the moon. I used to write about the sun rays, the moonbeam, and the smile on the rag picker's countenance. So I wrote poetry, I wrote essays, I wrote novels and novellas, and people started reading me. Well, anyway, and I was talking about this Oh Hark. I started writing on Facebook. It was a very surrealistic, spooky sort of a thing. I wrote every day, and for 3 days, I wrote continuously. Then I suddenly stopped. And then there was a barrage of questions, queries from my readers asking me, "What next, ma'am? Why did you stop?" So I couldn't luxuriate in a writer's block. I had to write. So when you're obsessed with something, when you're very, very passionate about something, you cannot resort to crutches like the writer's block. And another instance of Oh Hark was that in one of the scenes, I kill a character. He is a very, very interesting character who is there forever making fun of people, and he has this drum in his hand. He's the drummer. I just killed him in one of the episodes. And again, there was a barrage of questions and queries and laments from people. "Madam, why did you kill him? You are the writer, revive him." So again, I couldn't luxuriate in the writer's block. I had to think ways and means of resurrecting him from the dead. So he had fallen down the cliff. So in the next episode, I pulled him up from the cliff. So he said, this drummer follows the other guys and says, "I just took a false step. So I did not die." So he comes back and he goes on with it. So on the basis of my own experience, I'm telling all the writers, the budding writers, that there is no such thing as a writer's block. It's only in the mind. These are just the monsters of negativity that plague us all the time. They make funny faces at you, they make grotesque faces, and they try to browbeat you into submission. So the only antidote to this is write, write, and write. As James Thurber says somewhere, don't be obsessed with being right, R-I-G-H-T. Don't be obsessed with being right, just write. If you want to be a writer, no shortcuts, no crutches, no blocks, just write. Don't think of being right, just write. Just go berserk. Just keep writing, and something sure that creative spark is going to be ignited whenever you feel down or whenever those monsters of negativity try to scare you into submission. You just quash them with your confidence, and you will be a winner. You'll be a writer, you'll be a bestseller. Thanks.